we have Darren Sue and Jennifer Codian, and I'm going to ask them to turn on their cameras. Each of them, I'll call them out in order. We'll do a kind of a brief presentation of their issues and how they're dealing with them. We'll spend sort of the first 20 minutes kind of setting up what's happening in their different areas. We really want to have this to be an open dialogue with people. So the second half, the second 20 minutes will be dialogue. So you can put your question in the Q&A chat box, or you can raise your hand and Sunny can unmute you for you to ask your question. So really, we want this to be a dialogue. We're all here to learn from each other. I can assure you there are no experts in this issue. It's just too new for all of us. So with that, I want to introduce Dave Bennett. He's the Government Relations Manager for the Mile High Flood District, which is the regional flood control agency in the Denver metro area. Mr. Bennett has over 40 years of design and construction experience and has been at the district since 1981. He has a civil engineering degree from the University of Colorado and a master's degree from Regis University. He's a registered professional engineer in Colorado and a certified floodplain manager. Dave is also the past chair of the Colorado Association of Storm and Floodplain Managers, which is a pretty big organization there in Colorado. He serves as the board of directors on the board of directors for the University of Colorado in their construction, engineering, and project management program. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what you're doing there in the Denver area.
Thanks, Steve, and good morning, everybody. I thought I would start with a very brief overview of the Mile High Flood District to provide some context for those of you who don't know much about us. We are a regional government agency in the Denver metropolitan area, and we support and partner with 7 counties and 33 cities and towns to provide flood control services for about a 1,600 square mile area. And we serve a population of about 3.2 million people. Now, our services include master planning, floodplain mapping, design, construction, and maintenance of flood control facilities, flood warning, education and outreach, and development services. And as Mark touched on in his opening comments, homelessness is a challenge we're all grappling with. The district has certainly been dealing with the effects throughout our history, mostly through the cleanup and restoration efforts of these encampments. But in 2019, the need to move from being reactive to becoming more proactive really came to a head for us with the drowning death of a woman camped in front of a drainage culvert. It was a tragic event that could have been avoided. She got swept away in a flash flood and really didn't have a chance. So that really got us thinking about better approaches we could take. For us as an organization, one of our core values is public safety, and we really need to work to avoid situations where people are putting themselves at risk simply by where they're temporarily housed or asleep. So we are kind of working on a 3-step approach, and I'll briefly touch on each one of these. The first is regulatory. The district does have regional floodplain regulations, and our board recently adopted revisions, which, among other things, prohibits tents and makeshift structures from the floodplain. Now, none of us allow the building of homes and businesses in the floodplain for safety reasons, and we see this as an effort to be consistent with that thinking and really work to protect a vulnerable population. Now, our regulations work with our partner agencies' floodplain regulations, and where they overlap, the most restrictive applies. So ours is currently the most restrictive for our 7-county area. Now, we've taken the approach of, rather than trying to enforce our regulations, we're working with our partner agencies, and we're asking them to add the more restrictive language to their regulations. We've supported this request with a couple of tools. We provided a position paper outlining our public safety concerns. We have our floodplain regulations. We've gone as far as drafting sample language and proposed changes to their regulations. And then we support their efforts by attending council or board meetings to discuss the importance of these proposed changes. Now, to date, we've had several organizations adopt the more restrictive language, but quite frankly, we've seen reluctance by others to adopt the stricter rules. This is seen as a politically sensitive topic, primarily because there aren't good options for where to relocate those experiencing homelessness. Estimates put the number in our metropolitan area at over 30,000 individuals, and quite frankly, the local resources are maxed out. While we certainly understand that challenge, it doesn't address the public safety issue, and we can't allow anyone to sleep and live in these unsafe areas. So this is really going to be an ongoing effort for us to work with our partners to get the stricter language adopted and address our safety concerns. Once the regulations are in place, kind of step 2 for us is like to coordinate the enforcement of them. What we've noticed historically is one local government moving folks off of their jurisdiction, say on a river or an embankment, only to have them go across the street or downstream to someone else's jurisdiction, still in the floodplain. This doesn't really address our safety concern, it just relocates it and highlights the need for a coordinated approach. And this too is a work in progress that's going to take some time to sort out. What we've done is reached out to several homeless advocacy groups in the area to better understand the challenges the homeless are facing and to talk to them about our safety concerns. Now, one thing that really surprised me is prior to doing this outreach, they were completely unaware of the safety issues of camping in floodplains. They'd never heard about the drowning death. They don't hear about the swiftwater rescues that occur every year. So we really started a conversation educating them regarding the concerns we've had. We've also asked them to help educate us by providing training. We do encounter the homeless on a regular basis. So I've asked for training for our staff on how to manage these encounters better with an eye towards staff safety, and also an opportunity to educate those we come across about the safety issues of where they're located so that they know. And kind of the third step we're working on is modifying our designs to discourage encampments in our newly constructed flood control facilities. I know we'll be talking about that a bit later today in a discussion led by Abby with Clark County. So I'll stop there and maybe just mention that we do have a couple of resources we are willing to share. Our position paper outlining our thinking on the issue. And then certainly we have our floodplain regulations so you can see the changes we've made and the language we use. So if anybody's interested in those, let me know and I'd be happy to share. So I'll turn it back over to Steve and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dave. And any of our speakers, you feel free if you want to put anything in the chat box in terms of links to your website or resources that you have that you may want to share, as sort of what Dave spoke to there. So I want to turn to our next presenter, Darren Sue. Darren is a civil engineer and serves as policy advisor for the California Central Valley Flood Protection Board, which is a regulatory agency that ensures proper construction and maintenance of flood system facilities in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River system area. Previously, Darren served as chief of the Flood Operations Center at the California Department of Water Resources and a project manager for the Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District, where his responsibilities included dam remediation, flood risk reduction projects in the Central Valley area and Nevada. Prior to the Corps, Darren spent 12 years in the residential land development industry. Darren is a registered civil engineer and a PMP, project management professional. Great perspective. Darren also has served on the Elk Grove City Council, which I think is a city just south of Sacramento. So he also has that perspective as well. So Darren, welcome and give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to participate in this conversation that's passionate to me, both professionally and personally. You know, we're all wrestling with this issue, and public safety is really intersecting this great social issue right on our levees and floodplains. I want to start out by acknowledging some colleagues and professional friends, I would say, that helped with this issue from a legislative standpoint. We worked together with, you heard Scott Shapiro earlier today. He was one of the members. The Central Valley Flood Control Association, which represents many reclamation districts and local maintaining agencies in the Central Valley, the city of Sacramento, as well as a couple of the reclamation districts that are within the Sacramento region, American River Flood Control District and Reclamation District 1000. This issue came to our attention via the media, actually, and we wanted to help. Our board, as you mentioned, is a regulatory agency. We work closely with the reclamation districts in ensuring that our assurances to the federal government are upheld. And when this issue was raised via the media, we put together this steering group and talked about how we could be of service. And with the help of our local assembly members, Assemblymember Cooper, we put forth legislation. You heard earlier from Scott, it didn't make it, but I think it did a great job in problem solving in terms of what we could do, and also raising awareness within the legislature throughout the state. I want to just take a moment here to share a picture. This is so you can get an idea of what one of the main issues we were dealing with. Can you see that there, Steve? Is that coming clear?
Yes, it's coming through.
Okay, so the interesting thing about this is this was discovered by some inspectors, and I believe this was RD 1000, Reclamation District 1000's area, discovered by some inspectors. They put it on their list to come back and fix, but when they came back, it was actually covered with another tent, an encampment. Now, what that means is, had they not stumbled across this earlier, they would have never known it was there. So that was one of the challenges that we were wrestling with, was not just ensuring these things didn't happen, but being made aware of these issues to begin with. And so that begun or led, inspired our direction in terms of how to draft this legislation, which we were able to leverage our state water code and some authorities that were already provided to the board. That is the authority that any cutting or modifications to a levee should not be allowed without the board's permission. A violation of that is a misdemeanor already in the water code. It's existing legislation or existing code. So what we try to do is expand that legislation to say, hey, look, not only will you not cut or alter, but you will not modify, cover, deface, and prevent inspections, and that you would have the ability to, our inspectors would have the ability to inspect, meaning the local maintaining agencies could reference our water code and thereby make people remove their items for the purposes of inspections. So these were the problem-solving statements that we employed. Unfortunately, it was difficult, as you heard earlier. The rhetoric about criminalizing homelessness, the noticing requirements, dealing with the property rights. That's something that we did not want to address in state water code. We felt that property rights should be something addressed at the local level. So that was, a point of contention within the conversations that we had with the housing advocates or homeless advocates within the Capitol. The other challenge was the enforcement. And as we began these conversations with the city of Sacramento, we had a roundtable conversation, and it was what we found is a lot of law enforcement agencies were, and as you heard earlier, again, a lot of folks were misinterpreting the Boise case and what they were allowed to do. So we were trying to give law enforcement a tool that they could use that could pragmatically remove homeless encampments and make way for proper inspections and if necessary, repair. We tried to provide noticing for the 72-hour noticing was with a request, but try to provide 72-hour noticing outside of flood season. Here in California, our flood season is October to April. So our hope was to say, hey, we'll provide noticing outside of that period, but from September to March 31st, we would not provide that noticing, because if we discovered something, we would need time to fix it. And I would say that's another, it may not be throughout the nation, but from a state perspective, our levees are covered with vegetation. It adds a great societal ecosystem benefit. There's arguments that perhaps it could also, keep the integrity of the levees together. So there was a debate on that about, but you're not just looking at the landscape. It's just not blanket dirt. There's a lot of vegetation. So if you're not able to inspect those levees ahead of time and determine there's an issue, you won't have the time to fix it before the rainy season. So those were the things that we tried to address in that legislation. I think raising the issue and providing some options for folks to local jurisdictions to pull off of, even if it was not adopted at the state level. I know City of Sacramento adopted a local ordinance that deemed the levee system critical infrastructure, which again was something else that this bill did. And then, really communicated the fact that, hey, you can't camp, we can prohibit camping in certain areas. So that again, I think was a good clarification. The other thing I wanted to add, just from a local perspective, and Sunny, I think if we could tee this up, but from here in the city of Elk Grove, we've got to develop a program that is getting some attention nationally. And the headline is really a misnomer. It's saying that we're paying homeless to clean up after themselves, but this is really an incentivization program. It's giving homeless, I'll say credit cards, but really gift cards at local stores to buy food and supplies, anything but alcohol and cigarettes. It's a small amount, and it really incentivizes them to keep their areas clean. And we found this to be pretty effective. So, Sunny, you want to go ahead and play that? Thank you.
Okay, Darren, thank you very much.
Are you seeing that, Sunny?
Oh, there it is. Yep.
There's no audio though, Darren.
Yeah, you may want to narrate it.
Can you hear that?
So she showed the video. It was kind of choppy. You might want to just say what was on it, Darren.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, the point is, by going out there every couple of weeks, they will come out. That our city staff will come out. Police officers and our homeless advocates come out. They will, if you clean up your own trash, if you provide your own trash, they will provide a gift card. That's what I was trying to say. A gift card for certain grocery stores and local stores for folks to buy supplies and food. Now, that you don't get it per bag, so you don't have homeless folks going out and trying to drum up more garbage. Whether it's one bag or 5 bags, you're still going to get the same gift card up to $20. We use the CARES Act funding for this, so for folks nationally, obviously you're all going to have access to that. But we are also looking to continue the program with our CDBG funds, our Community Development Block Grants, which all of you through your HUD program will have access to as well. This has proven pretty effective to incentivize the homeless encampments to clean up after themselves. And the number one complaint we've heard locally is the trash, the amount of trash. So how this can help in our levee systems is this is something that we deal with all the trash and personal belongings. So incentivizing homeless populations to clean up after themselves, is a very effective tool. And I'd be happy to answer more questions about that in the chat, but I'll stop there. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Darren. Appreciate that. We went to our third and final panelist before we go to an open dialogue here. I want to introduce Jennifer Codian. Jennifer is serving as the acting deputy of the Watershed Operations and Maintenance Division at the Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's also simply just known as the Valley Water. Within Jennifer's division, there includes watershed field operations, operation and maintenance environmental support, vegetation management, and then operation and maintenance engineering support. So Jennifer, welcome and give us your thoughts.
Good morning, everyone. So to fill you in a little bit on Valley Water, we are a regional water district that operates in Santa Clara County in California. We serve over 2 million residents there. We provide water supply, flood protection, and environmental stewardship. Our district has over 800 miles of creeks, but we only have jurisdiction on 275 miles of creeks. Most of those miles are designed flood channels. So like all of you, we're experiencing the situation where it's heavily encamped and it's been hard for us to perform our routine maintenance. We have a 10-year programmatic permit that we call our stream maintenance program. And that allows us to do our routine activities that we need to do to maintain the design capacity of those flood control channels. In that program, we specify our mitigation activities that would allow for both mitigation for temporary and permanent impacts that we have annually on these flood control channels. So I'm here to present a new mitigation component of our program, and I'm calling it a pilot, not because it hasn't been approved by the regulatory agencies, it has. However, we just signed our last permit last week, actually. So we haven't actually implemented this type of mitigation as of yet. And I did prepare a little PowerPoint just so we all have something to stare at. Give me a second and I'll bring that up. Okay, and so like all of you, I'm sure these are all things that you're seeing out on your creeks and waterways. We have a problem with excavation of the banks, like you see in this picture here. This is a pretty common site where there's caves dug into the banks. Wildfire and threat of wildfire has become a huge issue. Obviously the trash and pollution in the creeks and waterways. And also you see here in this picture, this is a nice little stack of firewood that I'm sure has been prepared from our nice riparian trees in that area. And then also just blocking our maintenance access has been a big problem. So I think I heard earlier someone mentioned spending about $4 million a year for encampment cleanup. I can't say we're up to that level as of yet, although we just did secure additional funding source for this next year. So we will probably be spending a bit more than we have been. We've been averaging a bit over $1 million a year to clean up these encampments and to remove the litter. And thus far in the 6 years of our newest program, we've removed over 100,000 cubic yards of trash from these encampments. So it's become a major issue, and a lot of the residents that live adjacent to the waterways have become really upset about the level of trash in the creek channels. So we presented to the regulatory agencies a couple years ago, actually, and we were able to get this written into our new 5-year permits. The benefits of encampment cleanup and the rehabilitation of encampment-related bank excavation. And so, we presented it to them with the fact that it would reduce the pollutants that are going into the waterways and obviously reduce the chemicals that are emitted from the breakdown of organic trash and plastics and prevent the trash from moving into San Francisco Bay. Our county actually flows into 2 bays. The northern half of the county flows into San Francisco Bay, and the southern half eventually flows into Monterey Bay. And the protection of the riparian and wetland habitats and the impacts to the fish and other wildlife. Actually, the creeks in our county that are most impacted by encampments are also salmonid streams. So that is, definitely something that we're trying to protect. So there's two forms of mitigation credit that we've proposed and that were accepted by the regulatory agencies. The first just being the encampment cleanup. And so we've defined this as the removal of human-caused inorganic trash that's positioned to enter the waterways. And we have agreements from CDFW and also the regional water boards that we can use this as mitigation credit for temporary impacts within the watershed. And what I mean by temporary impacts are impacts such as pruning or removal of vegetation less than 6 inches in diameter, limb removal over 4 inches in diameter, minor impacts where the vegetation will grow back. And the one issue that we need to explore is we could not get the reg agencies to agree on how to calculate the methodology for mitigation. So we kind of left it as we want to calculate it based on square foot, and we haven't truly defined yet what that square foot looks like. Is it a square foot of the encampment site, or is it the square foot of the amount of trash that's on the ground? That is something that we're going to work towards defining when we submit for our first mitigation proposal, which will probably be this upcoming year, because like I said, the permits were just approved last week. So, you know, we'll work through this, and they did write into the permits that they have to approve the calculation before we can go ahead and do that work. So that's something we'll be working towards. The second form of mitigation is for the rehabilitation of encampment-related bank excavation. This is another cave area. This is one of our northern creeks, San Francisco Creek. This is during the summer. The creek is dry, and this cave was inhabited. And so this form of mitigation activity, we're basically saying, you know, the benefits are reducing the in-stream sedimentation, and that will protect water quality and, you know, hopefully facilitate the recovery of the riparian habitat. Because obviously when these banks are excavated, it denudes the habitat that is above it in most cases. And so this form of mitigation, we defined a little bit more, and it was accepted by the regulatory agencies. They agreed to mitigate at a 1-to-1 ratio. So basically, you know, if the bank repair that we do is 1,000 square foot, then we'll get 1,000 square foot of credit. The Army Corps did say that we would need to submit a compensatory mitigation plan, and that they would allow some leeway for the proposal, you know, based on the site-specific functions and values. So we could propose greater than a 1-to-1 ratio if we felt as though the repair did provide certain functions and values. And so that's something that we definitely will look towards in our first proposal. Now, however, the Corps was not going to allow us to receive mitigation credit if the repair was on a flood protection purpose. So i.e. if it is the repair of a levee that is used for flood protection, we would not be able to garner mitigation credit. It's really just if it was bank repair for rehabilitation and not for flood protection purposes. So that's kind of the caveat to this type of mitigation with the Army Corps. And that's all I have. I don't know if we want to do questions now or Steve at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll jump into questions.
Okay.
I think what I want to do, so all the speakers, you can unmute. This will just be an open conversation. I'll kind of lead off. We've got about 5 questions, and I'll try to read them. Sonny, if I miss them, just spell them out. So I'll try to characterize the first 2 questions for our panels and just, you know, we are all struggling with the homelessness. It's a social issue, but it's starting to impact the infrastructure that we are tasked to protect. So there's definitely a balance here of sympathy and understanding a larger social issue, but at the same time, knowing that we have to be stewards of this infrastructure, we have to protect that infrastructure. And so what are you guys, give me your thoughts about how to balance the two. You know, we don't want to be portrayed as the bad guy, but at the same time, we have jobs to do. There are potential liabilities. Give me your thoughts, all 3 of you, on that right balance that we're seeing.
I'm happy to jump in first if you want. I just think, number one, I think arming ourselves with good information is important. Um, it's fair to say we didn't fully understand the issue without really doing some outreach to folks and really trying to understand the complexity of what they're dealing with. We're not riding out there in our pickups trying to chase everybody off. We always post everything. We work with our local partners to provide flyers about options and things like that. And I just think trying to manage it in a humane way is what we're trying to do right now. It's never easy, but it certainly helps to know that we're trying to do the best we can.
Yeah, I agree with David. You know, I think one of the, well, first of all, your question about balance, I mean, to me, you know, when I look at public safety risk and then the homeless crisis, they're equal, right? And so in terms of balance, it needs to be a 50-50. The recognition that, you know, you're sleeping in a flood system that isn't safe for you. So we need to figure out how we can provide shelter to those folks and get them out of there. And to that end, I think what David alluded to was that outreach and communication. I think anecdotally, you know, too often do I hear the statements that, you know, oh, they're on drugs and their mental health, which are all very, very real. But there's also a huge segment of the population that are very capable of understanding their risk if you explain it to them, and the need to perhaps not dig into the levees. And I think if we maybe try to take that more humane approach in talking to them. And it's something that what we discovered, our city discovered with that gift card program, the relationships that were built by doing that was incredible. And by virtue of that, some of those folks, you know, were even able to get them into housing, because once that relationship was built, you started to have a conversation and figure out, you know, what they need. So 50-50 balance, but I think the tool of outreach is can be very powerful. We should rely on that more.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for us, we have the reality that there's upwards of 7,000 homeless in Santa Clara County, and a large proportion of those do live on the waterways. So we're faced with the fact for how can we balance the work we need to do with the fact that there will be encampments on our waterways. And so really looking at it from an issue more of, are the encampments blocking work that we need to do for flood protection purposes? And then secondarily, are the encampments in areas where we need to maintain regulatory compliance, a mitigation area, riparian planting site, an invasive plant removal project that we need to continuously treat and monitor. And so we're really leaving encampments in place unless they're affecting those two major functions of our water district. And I'll echo the outreach. We have a lot of outreach services in Santa Clara County, whether they're nonprofits or city or county agencies. And that really has been really useful for us. And we've been utilizing that service a lot more this year in light of COVID, and also in light of the Martin versus Boise ruling.
Yeah, and all of you have mentioned awareness and education, not only of the homeless, but of the community around you, that they won't see you portrayed as the bad guy, but trying to be humane and trying to find that balance. So there's a question here from Jeremy Phillips that says, do you have property rights, fee or easement to match your 100-year or just regulatory oversight? So in other words, the question is, what are you managing to in terms of the homeless encampments? Is it 100, 500, any of your property? What do you manage to?
Well, we have land ownership in our Sacramento San Joaquin drainage district. So there are floodways that were established many years ago. And so for those properties, we manage with anything that occurs in those areas.
We're trying to use the 100-year floodplain because we are a regional overlay of government. We don't own any land. So local governments own the land, but our thinking is the 100-year floodplain. And we're trying to work with our partners to manage to that level.
Ours varies depending on the flood control project itself. And we have a mix of ownership and easement throughout these flood control projects. And that's also problematic because usually the easement is city-owned properties, and there's various cities throughout the county. And so, a lot of the frustration with the neighbors is the understanding and who actually has property rights. And obviously, encampments are kind of beyond what we would have easement to deal with, right? Easement for us is for flow conveyance and not necessarily to control and manage encampments on those lands. So that's been difficult.
Nancy Cole from Pima County puts in a question about physical barriers relative to culverts. So she mentions, keeping people out, but yet at the same time, those barriers like grates create now a dam effect, blocking flow. You guys have experience on this. Do you try to keep people out of the culverts and pipes, or is that problematic?
We've tried a couple of different approaches. We're trying to avoid grates. There's not much we can do with the infrastructure that's already built. In building new infrastructure, we're trying things like having very wet openings or outlets, so it's muddy. Nobody likes to be muddy, so that's helped a little bit. The problem where we're having is these big 10 by 10 boxes that come in, and so rather than putting a 10 by 10 box, we may be putting in 2 4 by 15 foot boxes or something like that. Conveys the same flow, but doesn't provide the easy access, or are two things we've been working on.
Yeah, I'll answer that too. The culverts are problematic for us because those are typically city constructed and city maintained. And like I said, we have various cities throughout the county. And so, the homeless do live in the culverts, but it's the city's responsibility to kind of come out and warn them in light of upcoming floods. So it's not really something that we have control over as a water district.
We manage a lot of the levees, 1,600 miles of state plant flood control levees. The interior drainage issues of culverts, we usually work with the reclamation districts and cities, so we're not usually involved in those.
And we have a question here from Chris, who says, really to funding, how are you guys funding this? You mentioned the CARES Act, Aaron, I think. Can you file insurance claims on your infrastructure? These are all new costs for many of us. So what are your thoughts on how to fund these mitigation efforts?
Well, that's something that we actually we're been trying to pursue through the governor's office and in developing a program that would be general funded. A lot of these reclamation districts, it might have been stated earlier in the previous panel, but it was a lot of them do assessments, that they have their own assessments that they collect, and so a lot of these to pay for all these is taken out of their normal maintenance budget. So it's definitely something new that they haven't had to account for before. So I think it's certainly a challenge here in California. The way the assessment laws and things work, there's limitations there. So I think it's definitely a conversation that we'll continue and start to get more attention, because we can't tax people, continue to tax people higher for these things.
For Valley Water, the last 15 years, we've been funding it under a voter-approved parcel tax. And the last program, we pretty much went through the money in 4 or 5 years that was dedicated to the homeless encampment cleanup. And so, we realized with this last renewal effort for the parcel tax that we would need to go out and, garner more money and more support for this effort. And the latest parcel tax was approved in November of 2020, and we had a 75% approval. And so this next 15-year program, we have 38.7 million dedicated to encampment cleanups countywide. So we've been really lucky with that effort, and that the public understands the need for us to be able to support this effort.
For us, we've just been using our maintenance funds. It really cuts into our ability to build new infrastructure. We always tend to maintain first, so we're building less because we're spending more on maintenance. So
Yeah, and I think with the final minute or two, a lot of people will, a lot of us have our own local infrastructure. We have some state-funded infrastructure, and we have federal funded infrastructure. Kind of curious to all of you, do you manage the assets differently based on the funder? In other words, Jennifer sort of touched on work with the Corps of Engineers. So speak to us about how you deal with your infrastructure based on who's funding. Are there, like in California, are there certain criteria that's different than federal than your local? So speak to the maintenance as it pertains to your state and federal partners.
So at the state level, we're required to maintain infrastructure. We have a state federal system. So a lot of it is borne by us. We actually have we've been working on the centralized flood protection plan with our state partners, the Department of Water Resources. We've determined we have approximately 100 million annually in maintenance shortfall funding. So it continues to be a challenge for us, but we utilize state funds. And there's a combination. If it's local infrastructure, a lot of that's maintained locally.
I guess just to clarify my question, is the way you deal with the homeless different based on who funded the infrastructure? In other words, state criteria of dealing with homeless versus federal criteria, which is still in development, really.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from what I can see, it's still evolving. A lot of the funding is relied upon at the local level. It's something that if you're using state funding, it's or federal funding, whether it's CDBG funds or some other route, it's not something that has been dedicated as of right now.
I mean, for us, we're basically maintaining to the same level regardless of how it was constructed. Obviously, the Corps comes with their own standards for maintenance and things like that. But generally, we're treating it pretty uniformly across the systems, regardless of who built it.
Yeah, I'll echo that. We treat it uniformly. And then since our funding is coming from the parcel tax, it's locally funded.
Great. Well, thank you, all of you. That sort of concludes this first panel. We're going to take about a 10-minute break. If everybody can come back at 40 minutes after the hour, whichever time zone you're coming from. So about 9 minutes from now, and then we'll have a second panel to continue this dialogue on local strategies for mitigation. So thank you, and we'll see you in about 9 minutes.
Thank you.